Okay, this is my first contact event in Dr. Greer's CSETI. This was November 2003 in Joshua Tree, and it was a Tuesday, I believe, and second day of the training class, the week-long training. And it was the first day I met Dr. Greer, and we went to a place called Hidden Valley in Joshua Tree, and I it was cold. It was very cold. It was in the 20s. And just before we sat down, we were actually in a parking lot and or the end of a road, and we there was 33 of us, and we sat down in a circle there. Um, Made the circle, but just before we sat down, we started seeing colored flashes around us on the rock. And I was with talking to Fred, who was a nuclear physicist at Los Alamos Laboratories. This was his first time in CSETI. His wife, Trudy, had been doing this since the early 90s, and she finally talked him into coming. So him and I were talking, and all of a sudden we see these yellow, green, red little sparkles and flashes on the rocks and around, and people were shining their lasers around. And I thought, well, maybe they're the lasers. And well, wait a sec, we don't have yellow lasers, uh, and a few other different colors. So that was very odd. And we went, sat in our seats, and we started meditating. Dr. Greer did a guided meditation, and then we kind of settled in. And I began to see kind of an orange blob in front of me with my eyes closed. And I knew I'd done a lot of meditation and I knew it was something there, but I didn't know what it was. And then all of a sudden, Dr. Greer starts screaming and says, "There's an ET in front of you. There's an ET in front of you." And I didn't know what it was, but I finally said, "Yeah, I see it, but I'm trying to meditate, so don't bug me," or something like that. Um, but it still kind of looked like a blob. But after 20 minutes, it be, everything became clear, and what I saw was a man that was, I don't know how tall, but he was just a normal human, and an orange ship. We were in a ship. The ship had materialized around us. um, is absolutely amazing. And the rest of the group, some people knew that. Other people was very interesting. They had missing time. We spent 2.5 hours in the ship, and some people had no idea what had happened. It was like nothing happened. And these were people that hadn't really been meditating a lot. Some of them were smoking pot before, and the people that had meditated quite a bit or had been experiencing it, everybody was aware of what went on of that group. But that's the first time I understood what missing time was. It was actually a there was a shift in the vibration or frequency within the ship, shifting your consciousness, kind of bringing you in line with them. And what I realized later on was that their energy, their frequency is different than ours. Their reality is slightly different than ours. When the two, when you're close to them, there's a conflict between us and them and whatever. When you learn to meditate, you can shift more into their frequencies and consciousness. And so you can see what's going on and begin to understand what's going on. Some people could see, but it was confusing at first until you did it enough. There's a big clash when you're directly physically working, experiencing, making contact. Something you would never know unless you actually experienced it. And it's amazing. But for me, I witnessed that. For me, it was it took 20, 30, maybe 40 minutes for everything to get really clear. But my consciousness actually feels more comfortable in the shifted consciousness. I don't know what that means, but it's true, and there are other experiences that I had that I can tell you about that. So I mentioned to you that it was like 29 degrees outside, and here we are after everything kind of cleared up. We're in a ship that's orange, but it's not completely solid, and you could put your hand through the wall and out to the outside, and it was way colder. It was somebody had a thermometer, and they put their hand out, held it there. There was a good 20 degrees difference from the inside to the out. Now, at that point, we were talking to each other um, about what was going on. But as we went along, it seemed like the energy level within the ship allowed us to drift into a deeper meditative state, actually, um, because this experience lasted over 2.5 hours. And being my first CSETI, I thought, well, so I guess we meditate for 2.5 hours. Not, we don't ever do that. I mean, it's a guided meditation, and it may be 15 minutes or 20 minutes or so. We sat in that ship in a meditative state for 2.5 hours. Now, I had my eyes open and closed, and it didn't matter whether my eyes were open or closed. I could still see things about the same, which was, fascinating. The other thing is, I mentioned it took 30, 40 minutes or whatever to get to become clear for me. Now, I can't speak for anybody else on that, but uh, I hadn't ever really, I haven't been awake really ever experiencing that before. And I guess it took a little while for my tuners, to sync, kind of like get on the channel. It's kind of like tuning the channel on the TV. Took me a little bit to completely shift over. So that's my thought on it. Um, so the fellow, the ET that I saw in front of me, he was a human. He looked just like us, but he wasn't solid either. He was kind of glowing orange. Nothing in the ship except for us were completely solid, and that is normally the experience when you physically meet the ETs in the field. Not always, but the reason for it, I have some ideas that for their safety, so they can't be targeted for maybe bacteria, germs transmission. You probably can't do it then, or maybe it's too difficult. But I've seen them solid before. These ETs over the years, I've interacted with them quite a bit, and yes, can become solid. Um, and anyhow, there's two ETs on board. There was the pilot who was sitting at a control panel in the center of the ship, but kind of off to one side. He had his hands on the control panel. He was focusing on controlling the ship. And in the 2.5 hours, I never saw him break his focus, his concentration on maintaining that ship perfectly. His hands were there, and that's all he did. And I glanced over quite a bit on it, on him. I mean, if you can imagine, let's say the ship suddenly went solid and we had our arm out, that'd be very bad. Let's say something bad happened on the outside and somebody targeted the ship, which unfortunately happens. He'd have to do something really fast. Hopefully, take us with him, or so we don't end up being there getting, you know. But anyhow, the one fellow, and these are researchers, these are scientists. I've learned over the years. There's a research station in Joshua Tree, and they're wonderful, wonderful people. And I call them people because what else are you gonna call them? They're people. So one fellow comes up and oh, he has a scanner. It looks like a little tricorder from Star Trek in his hand, and he comes up to me and he says, "Now this is telepathically. All of everything was telepathic." And he says to me, I'd like to scan you. Is that okay? And I believe when I said to him, I said, yes, that's okay. You have my permission to scan me. And with your high integrity, you can scan me anytime you want for the rest of my life. And I said, and there's plenty of good and plenty of bad to see. And so I don't know where this came from. It just kind of flew in and flew out, that whole thing. And he kind of looked startled and he says, well, thank you. uh, and so he went through and scanned me. I couldn't feel anything, but he went up and down my body and scanned me and then walked away and did the same thing to everybody else. There was 33 of us. And I'd say 45 minutes later or so, he came back to me and he says, I have something for you. Can I show you? And I said, well, sure. So just a little couple twitches on the dial. Well, my God, all of a sudden, everybody turned into fountains of light. I could see them, but they became light beams. You could see the Kundalini, the vortex, going straight up into space. And it didn't just do that. This was me too. It was like a fountain. It went straight up, but over your head, it broke off like a fountain, went around us, and fell into a pond. It was glowing white below me. And everybody was like that, bright. And I closed my eyes, put my hands over it, opened my eyes. It didn't make any difference. I'm completely blown out at this point. Well, I'm just completely blown out by this whole thing. I've never seen anything like it. I have no idea how he chose to show me this. But what was interesting is that it reminded me of a book I had read. It was James Twining, Emissaries of Light. And they talked about healing the area and all got together with the light going up into the sky and spreading out from each of the people. What was interesting about this book, this was in the mid 90s. I was in a bookstore and walking through the center of the aisle. It was a wide aisle. And all of a sudden, the book jumps and hits me right in the toes, comes out, hits me right in the toes. So I looked at the book. I looked over at the shelf. Well, there's a backing on the shelf. So there is no way anybody could push it. So I just said, okay. And I picked the book up and read it. Well, anyhow, he's kind of showed me this, but way more intense. So with this energy around me was a bubble of light. I could see the energy bubble around me. And Trudy, the woman Trudy had been experienced this a lot, was next to me with her bubble. So I decided to kind of push my bubble out, bump into hers. Well, I kind of just pushed it out, hit her, and it bounced off, bounced away. So I tried it again, it bounced away. And I thought about it for a moment. I said, go into heart energy, go from the heart with love and see what happens. Don't just push. And I did that. We merged. Her and I merged. And what was absolutely amazing was the energy of the light going up, the vortex going straight up, curved in. The two of us kind of curved in together and it got brighter, but not double. It was like 4 times brighter. It was an exponential gain. So I played with this for a few hours. And by the end of the night, I was able to wrap all 33 people. So we were like one. The vortex from each of us all came together, went straight up to, I don't know how far up, but I imagine it was a bright flare over the earth. And the brightness of it, if it was the sun, it would have blinded me. It was so bright. It was absolutely amazing. Now, it took me quite some time to figure out what this all meant and what to do what it has to do with anything. But what I believe, now, what I'm sure is that when we all get together and we meditate as a whole, as everybody on this planet, That is what happens when we connect. And if that energy is done with love, it will change everything on the earth. And it's an exponential gain. So it doesn't require everybody, it only requires a small portion. And that is absolutely what they showed me. That's absolutely what everybody's doing now. But I saw it physically. I mean, I saw it. So anyhow, it's just fascinating. So afterwards, we get up and a couple people talk. My friend Ricky, just a wonderful guy who's been doing CSETI for since the mid '90s when it started. I'm not saying anything afterwards, and we're going to share it. I'm going. I'm not going to be the first to share, and so he just says, "Well, I don't know about the rest of you, but we just spent the last 2.5 hours in a ship." And I go, oh, "Thank you. I wasn't going to be the first one to say it." and and so people described different things that they saw, and people saw slightly different things, but it was common that there was a control panel where the pilot was. Some people didn't seem to see the occupants, which was interesting, but the two people, ETs. But afterwards, I walked out into the desert alone, just going, "Wow, this is just amazing." And I well, it was about midnight, and I walked into the dark, and as I came up to a rock, all of a sudden in front of the rock, there was like a big glowing orange rose, the bud, and all of a sudden it opened and it flowered into this beautiful, beautiful rose right in front of me. Well, first I was amazed, and then I got a little freaked out that I was in the desert alone. After all this, I don't know why. Just yeah, maybe I'll get out of here and join the group, but it was just fascinating. So anyhow, that was my first experience with Dr. Greer C. SETI, and that was just the beginning of so many things that happened. It's just an amazing experience. So that's it. Thanks.